Imagine standing on a barren hill in the heart of the Persian Gulf, the wind carrying the taste of salt and ancient dust. Beneath your feet, the earth is riddled with tens of thousands of burial mounds, a sprawling necropolis that stretches to the horizon. This is not a wasteland of death, but the threshold of a forgotten paradise, a kingdom so magnificent that it was called the land of the living. Historians named it Dilmun, a place whispered about in the oldest stories ever written by human hands. To the Sumerians, it was a pure and holy land where sickness and old age simply did not exist. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero journeyed here, seeking the secret of immortality, passing through the twin peaks of Mashu into a garden of jewels. The cuneiform tablets described a place of sweet water wells, where carnivorous beasts ceased their hunting and no widow mourned. But for all its mythic status, for centuries, Dilmun was considered nothing more than a beautiful fiction, a Mesopotamian Atlantis. Then, in the shifting sands of a small island archipelago, archaeologists began to unearth something that defied all rational explanation. They were looking for a myth, but what they found was a sophisticated commercial empire that had somehow vanished from the historical record. The first clues emerged not from a palace, but from the silent geometry of those burial mounds on the island of Bahrain. Estimated to number over 170,000, these tombs represent a concentration of death that suggests a vast, unseen population. The silence of the tombs is the first and most enduring riddle of Dilmun, a civilization that seemed to prefer anonymity to glory. You could easily walk across the tumuli field for hours, never noticing that you are traversing a graveyard built for a paradise. To understand the gap between the myth and the dirt, we must first look to the clay tablets of ancient Mesopotamia. As early as the 4th millennium before the Common Era, Sumerian scribes were recording Dilmun as a trading partner. These were not legendary tributes. They were inventory lists, written with the bureaucratic dryness of a customs officer. The evidence pointed to a mercantile choke point, a Singapore of the Bronze Age, sitting at the nexus of the Indus Valley and the Tigris-Euphrates floodplains. For decades, the archaeological map had a blank space where the sea routes of the Indian Ocean and the Persian Gulf intersected. It was Danish archaeologist Geoffrey Bibby who decided to fill that void in the 1950s, driven by a singular obsession. Digging through the harsh, sun-scorched crust of Bahrain, Bibby's team struck a layer of pure, ashy gray soil far below the surface. It was not a natural stratum. It was the compressed, rotted remains of a collapsed reed hut from a prehistoric settlement. Carbon dating of the soil pushed the clock back to over 5,000 years, placing the first settlement directly in the dawn of urban life. But the most astonishing discovery was not the age of the settlement, but the identity of its most prized possession: fresh water. The land was surrounded by a bitter sea, yet deep, artesian aquifers bubbled up through the limestone, creating freshwater springs literally in the ocean. Sailors could lower gourds into the seabed and pull up drinking water, a miracle that likely inspired the mythic sweet water of the Dilmun paradise. The port city they uncovered was massive, a sprawling complex of warehouses and limestone blocks built to store riches from 3 continents. Deep within the ruins, they found a carnelian bead from Gujarat, a soapstone seal from the Indus city of Harappa, and a clay tablet written in an unfamiliar trade language. These scattered relics painted a picture of a world far more interconnected than traditional history ever dared to imagine. That forgotten trading post was the beating heart of Dilmun, a place where the underworld myth and the dry reality of commerce collided. Dilmunite seals, tiny cylinders carved with intricate animal motifs and mythological scenes became the signature artifact of the mystery. Every trader needed a seal to stamp their goods, yet the iconography on these stones is hauntingly ambiguous. We see a bullman, a hero, and a sacred tree, motifs that echo the Gilgamesh epic, but arranged in a visual language that belongs solely to Dilmun. The seals are a cryptographic key without a Rosetta Stone, a visual diary of a people who made their living by the sea but kept their secrets in symbols. While the harbor buzzed with the noise of dock workers and the haggling of merchants, the spiritual life of Dilmun remained tightly guarded. Where are the grand temples, the imposing ziggurats that defined the splendor of their Sumerian neighbors to the north? In Dilmun, the sacred seems to have been submerged within the secular, perhaps hidden in the very structure of the fresh water pools. It is as if the myth of the garden was embedded not in stone, but in the sensory experience of the oasis itself. Where the spade of the archaeologist hesitates, a labyrinth of competing theories rises from the dust to fill the void. The traditional academic consensus places the mythological heart of Dilmun firmly on the island of Bahrain and its adjacent coasts. This theory points to the density of the burial mounds and the scale of the merchant infrastructure as proof of a centralized kingdom. The artifacts suggest a culture powerful enough to dominate the Gulf trade for over 2,000 years, then vanish into silence. But a darker hypothesis suggests we are looking at the wrong island, that Bahrain is merely a colossal satellite cemetery. Some researchers argue that the true political capital lies hidden beneath the sands of Falaka Island in Kuwait, or under the marshes of the Saudi mainland. A Bronze Age catastrophe, perhaps a pandemic or a rapid shift in the monsoon, might have forced the population to drift away, leaving only mortuary customs behind. If the sweetwater aquifers collapsed or were poisoned by saltwater intrusion, the land of the living would have mutated into a land of unlivable thirst overnight. You have to wonder if the Sumerian legend of paradise wasn't a memory of this ecological collapse, an idealized dream of a land before the water went bitter. What if the myth of Dilmun is actually a eulogy, a story told by the refugees who fled to and Nippur, carrying only the memory of divine springs? We are left staring at a death mask of a civilization, trying to read the expression of a face that has long since turned to dust. The labyrinth deepens when we follow the incense road to the south toward the legendary land of Magan. Geologists have located the copper mines of Magan in modern-day Oman, proving that the geography of the myths is terrifyingly accurate. If Magan is real and the Indus trade is real, then the Garden of Dilmun cannot be dismissed as a simple fairy tale. It forces a chilling question. Was the quest for immortality in the Epic of Gilgamesh a search for an actual location? Perhaps the plant of eternal youth was not a literal herb, but a metaphor for the pearl trade, a source of unending vitality and wealth that Dilmun monopolized. The Dilmunites were master divers, pulling air-breathing treasures from the abyss of the salt sea, defying the boundary between the living world and the dark deep. Their very economy was a dance with the abyss, a daily descent into a blue silence that mirrors the hero's journey into the underworld. Some esoteric historians whisper an even stranger theory, that Dilmun was not a physical kingdom, but a liminal state, a diplomatic zone of neutrality. In this reading, the absence of weapons and fortifications in the early strata suggests a sacred truce, a united nations of the prehistoric world. Merchants from hostile empires might have mingled here under a divine pact, exchanging goods in the only place where shedding blood was prohibited. If that is true, The collapse of Dilmun was not the death of a nation, but the shattering of the world's first great peace. The mystery of the burial mounds also refuses to yield to a simple demographic explanation. The sheer number of tumuli implies a population far exceeding the agricultural capacity of the islands, a hunger for stone that defies logic. Who was brought here to die? Were these the massed remains of a pilgrimage that lasted for centuries, or a necropolis for a continent? In the 4th millennium BCE, the inhabitants built distinctive honeycomb tombs, complex radial chambers that channel the soul into the earth. These are not hastily dug graves. They are engineered gateways to eternity, built by a people seemingly obsessed with the exact moment of departure. Yet despite this obsession, no physical body within them has ever revealed a royal diadem or a king's scepter. The human obsession with Dilmun is perhaps the most dangerous artifact buried in that sand. Geoffrey Bibby spent his life digging there, haunted by the whispers of an empire that refused to give up its invisible crown. There is a specific psychological weight that crushes an archaeologist when they realize a society has been erased not by fire, but by simple abandonment. You search for a dramatic final battle, a conquering army, but all you find is a slow, quiet closing of a door. The Dilmunites simply stopped importing the rough stone from Oman, stopped carving their cryptic seals, and faded back into the haze of the Gulf. To stand in the excavation pit is to feel a profound emptiness, a vacuum where the narrative spine of a civilization should be. It is the absence of disaster, the terrifying quiet of a people who literally walked away from paradise, that drives the human mind to invent theories. We cannot accept a silent exit. We demand a villain, a drought, a plague, a god's wrath, anything but the gentle rotting of time. Perhaps the merchants of Dilmun suffered from a curse of prosperity, a gradual drift into greed that eroded the sacred neutrality of the oasis. Or perhaps they were victims of their own success. Once the Indus Valley civilization collapsed, the trade routes died, and the middleman had no one left to trade with. The silence of Dilmun is a mirror reflecting our own fear of irrelevance, the terror of a world that will not remember our name. We cover the island in satellite dishes and ground-penetrating radar, desperately trying to hear a heartbeat in the limestone. Yet the wind still erases our footprints as quickly as we make them. A reminder that the desert does not owe us an answer. The Dilmunites left behind a paradise scattered in fragments, a puzzle that infects every historian with a quiet, gnawing melancholy. You might think that the discovery of a lost paradise would bring joy, but walking among the tombs at dawn brings only a shiver of existential dread. There is a twilight moment on the tumuli fields when the sand turns the color of bruised bronze, and the horizon dissolves into liquid heat. In that moment, the distinction between the past and the present, the living and the dead, melts away like a mirage. You perceive the forgotten kingdom not as a place, but as a space between the ticking of a clock, a memory the earth is slowly digesting. The eternal fade of Dilmun teaches us that ruins are not just stones, but the fossilized echoes of unspoken prayers. History is not a solid library of solved cases. It is a vast ocean of silence, with only a few fragile islands of known facts breaking the surface. The greatest trick of time is not destruction, but transformation, turning a bustling harbor of sweet water into a featureless desert of salt. We dig because we are lonely in the present, hoping to find a version of ourselves that lived in a purer, more magical era. But the sand keeps its secrets with a cruel grace. It lets us find just enough to know that we will never know everything. The seals of Dilmun remain undeciphered in their deepest meaning, their bullmen and crescent moons dancing just beyond the edge of comprehension. To contemplate this forgotten kingdom is to dive into an abyss where the stars of history have been snuffed out, leaving only the blackness of lost time. What was it like to draw breath in that garden? To drink the water that welled up from the dark heart of the earth? That sensory truth, the taste of the myth, is locked forever behind the iron gate of a past we cannot breach. We are left with a silhouette of paradise, a shadow cast by a fire that went out 5,000 years ago. And in the end, the wind still blows across the burial mounds, singing the only song that this ancient silent world will ever need.